Hi everyone. I thought I would do a brief lecture on female quests. So this is a PowerPoint version of the lecture that I would have given you if we were still all together. So I hope that you'll be able to follow this okay, and if you have any questions or comments about it, please just email them. So this lecture will be about female quests with an emphasis on archetypes of the mature feminine. So let's start with the question, why study female quests? And there are basically three reasons, I think. First, to see in what ways they are similar to male quests. And if the quest is an archetype, then it should contain universals that apply both to men and women. Second, to see how they differ. So are there features of female quests that are not accounted for by the various models that we have studied, by the Jungian archetypes, by Campbell's quest model, and by king, warrior, magician, lover, which are the three major paradigms that we have used. And thirdly, I'm going to say yes, there are, and we'll see that in a moment. And so the third reason to study female quests is to start filling in some of those gaps. So the plan for the rest of this presentation is pretty simple. First, I'm going to talk very briefly about Jungian archetypes and Campbell's quest paradigm, and then I'm going to spend most of the time on what I will call queen, huntress, wise woman, lover, archetypes of the mature feminine. Okay, so about Jung and Campbell. Well, first of all, for Jung, it's pretty simple. I actually think that Jung deals very well with female quests, and the reason is that Jungian psychology incorporates some gender-specific qualities already. So it distinguishes between the anima and the animus, and also between logos and eros. It also does make clear that men and women both contain some gender-opposite forces. So although according to Jung, logos does predominate in men. Men need to cultivate eros as well, and the opposite is true of women. Campbell, on the other hand, I think could do a much better job addressing female quests. And here I'll just offer, three basic observations that I have made, in thinking about female quests and in reading Campbell. So first of all, in my sort of observation, the terrain of adventure in female quests is much more likely to be an enclosed space, like a house, a mansion, a castle, something like that, than it is in a male quest. So the male quest, most often takes place spanning wide geographical locales. It takes place in the forest, it takes place on the ocean, and you can think about, as examples of that, how basically Eric and Evain and also Gilgamesh, they venture out into forests primarily. Whereas now, of course, Enid, does accompany Eric on the quest. However, at the points in time at which she is very specifically tested, you'll recall, is with these, with the counts. And notice that these both take place indoors. So with the first count, the count comes to Eric and Enid, and he confronts her sort of indoors. And then also with the second count, Count Oringal of Limor, he threatens her, and it's essentially when Eric wakes up and kills the Count that her adventure is over. For that matter, if you think about Laudine, she, her entire experience is pretty much in her castle. So that's one observation. The terrain of adventure is more likely to be in closed space, like a house. Second, there is very often the presence of a paternal figure. So I think that the father looms much larger in a female quest than the mother does in a male quest. So we only have to look at Enid's father, how important he is at the beginning of that story there as an example. And thirdly, very often the female quest features some sort of strife and misunderstanding with the partner. And again, as my example, I'm just gonna refer you to Eric and Need. How much of this story is basically about well, essentially the misunderstanding between Eric and Enid and the miscommunication and everything that ensues. Okay, but I think it's more productive to look at king, warrior, magician, lover, archetypes of the mature masculine, and apply that to female characters, because I have not yet found a good study of this. There are some books and such that try to do this, but I don't think that they have done a very good job with this, and the reasons for that are complicated, and I would be happy to answer these, to address that if people are interested in it. But suffice it to say that I think we can actually do a better job right here in a in a 10-minute lecture than people have done applying this paradigm to a female model. So just as a reminder, this is sort of based on the idea that people basically have three realms in which they can seek excellence, three primary modes of interacting with the world. And the first of these is physical. So the positive archetype here is the warrior. And then the negative, which is over-identified, so the plus here means over-identified with, has too much of. So this energy too much of is a bully, and too little of the energy is a coward. And these, I think, are fairly, self-explanatory. The intellectual is then, in the positive sense, the magician archetype, the person who has mastered arcane, secret knowledge, especially intellectually based knowledge. And the negative versions of that, the person who kind of exploits that, is the con artist, and the individual, the male who does not have enough of that, we see as the fool. And I'm not talking about here as the classical fool, as in, we see like in King Lear or something like that, but just, a dummy. And thirdly then, the person who acts effectively in a social and emotional realm is the lover. And the negative archetype, over-identifying too much with that, is the addict. And the negative I'm simply going to call the Puritan. That is the person who sort of, rejects love, warmth, and similar things. The king then combines all three in a positive sense, and the negative example of the king is the tyrant, that is in the over-identification, and having too little of that is the absent father. Okay, so let's try to apply this to female equivalents, and again, this is kind of my own analysis, so if you can think of something better, feel free to disagree, but here it goes. So I think that the positive archetype here in the physical domain for women is in fact the huntress, and really good examples include Neytiri. If you remember to Avatar, she is primarily seen always as a huntress. The Roman goddess Diana, and we've seen Joseph Campbell talk quite a lot about her. So if you don't remember her, go look her up. Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and many other examples. Even Buffy the Vampire Slayer hunts vampires. So there you go, the huntress. The negative archetype of over-identification I would call the Fury. And a really good example of that is Ishtar, the Mesopotamian goddess of war, and when Gilgamesh rejects her, she goes nuclear on him. Then we have other good examples are the trope namers, namely the Greek Furies. They are the goddesses of vengeance, and if you mess with them, Norse Valkyries, who will open a can on you. And then the negative in under-identification, we can call the doormat. This is a person who, lets other people walk all over them, doesn't have, sort of any self-confidence, just sort of lacks that necessary element of aggression, which, helps to maintain you in the world. And I think that many, many female heroes and stories begin as such. So, Enid at the beginning, Bella in Twilight, and Katniss in the Hunger Games. These are all female heroes who initially seem just really, really, really meek, and then develop their strength throughout the story. All right, moving along to the intellectual domain. So the positive, I think, could be considered the wise woman, the sage, the female sage. And examples here include Dr. Grace Augustin and Moat, both from Avatar. As a younger character, Hermione Granger from Harry Potter, and then I think a really good example is also Lunette from Yvain. We could also certainly classify, for example, the Greek goddess Athena here, all wise women in an intellectual domain. And the negative, with over-identification, I think the witch is a good example here. Traditional examples just abound in fairy tales. And, these are people who use that hidden knowledge that they have acquired in their wisdom to, do harm to other people. And then the negative in under-identification, well, the Dits. So Dory in Finding Nemo, and just 3 billion examples in pop culture, which also get subverted in movies like Legally Blonde, Miss Congeniality, etc., where we find the combination of both brains and beauty that sort of plays with the idea that a very attractive person is going to be deficient in intellectual qualities. All right, so in the social emotional domain, the positive archetype is, as in the male, the lover. Good examples here, I think, are Neytiri, Enid, and Laudine, who all have really nice phases as lover archetype. The negative example of this in over-identification, I think you get a few different examples of this, or manifestations, if you like. One is the femme fatale, the manslayer. Another is the prostitute, which I think is self-explanatory. And then the third, which I think is important to include, is the gossip. And so the gossip exploits her power, not through her charms and kind of manipulating people with her, with her physical allure, but rather through social ties. And the gossip basically, commits, almost kind of like social assassination by targeted gossip. And examples here of the femme fatale certainly include Ishtar, and in terms of the gossip, well, there's literally a show called Gossip Girls. I've never watched it, but I think the title seems self-explanatory. And the negative in the under-identification is the loner. So apologies here for some outdated references, but Violet Parr in The Incredibles, Raven in Teen Titans, and Moaning Myrtle in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets are all instances of this. All right, finally, so the combination of all three, the positive is simply the queen, just as the king archetype is for men. And then good examples of the queen are Enid at the end of the story, Queen Guinevere in Eric and Enid, and in Yvain. Laudine, I threw in a question mark here. Is she a good queen? Not entirely sure, but I think you could make a case that she is. And basically reflections of simply the good mother in, all the various stories you can think about, as the king archetype is essentially a reflection of the good father. The negative in terms of over-identification here is you could think of as the smother mother, or Queen Bee. So Penelope with Telemachus in the Odyssey. Just about every mother that I've seen in a Game of Thrones, and of course your stereotypical mother-in-law. And in the negative, we have, I think, the absent mother. And so Katniss's mother at the beginning of Hunger Games is, just checked out. Bella's mom in Twilight is busy with her own relationships. And just very often, frankly, female heroines just don't even have a mother at all. So now that we've looked at this, some questions for Beauty and the Beast, that is the fairy tale and not the movie, so please read the brief summary that is up on Moodle, and then post your response to any of the 5 questions here on our class forum. So question number 1, feel free to question, supplement, etc. any of the points presented here. Again, these are just my own ideas, so certainly don't take them as gospel, but feel free to annotate them as you wish. Secondly, do a Jungian reading of Beauty and the Beast. Again, the fairy tale here, don't do a global reading of everything, but just focus on some specific point that you would like to dig into and analyze in detail. Thirdly, take Campbell's quest paradigm, including some of the things that were stated earlier, and do the same thing, again, focusing on a particular element. Finally, you can apply the Queen Huntress, Wise Woman Lover paradigm to Beauty and the Beast. Again, focus on a specific element. Or question number 5, are there some other things that you can think of where female quest narratives are distinct from male quests? Or do you see other things that are significant that I did not point out, that are qualities that they share? So please think about which of these 5 questions you would like to reply to, and then post your response to the class forum. So take care. Hope everybody isn't going stir crazy and is staying healthy.